Disappearing completely only required a rusted Honda Civic and a quiet morning exit. The true tragedy was the timeline. It took my parents exactly 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days to realize their daughter no longer lived down the hall. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't an apology. If you looked at a photograph of the Castillo family, you would see the perfect American portrait. My father, Rayford, was a moderately successful commercial real estate developer in upstate New York, a man whose entire personality was built around profit margins, zoning board meetings, and the crispness of his golf shirts. My mother, Susan, was the quintessential suburban architect of appearances. Her life was an endless series of charity galas, country club luncheons, and obsessing over my older brother, Harrison. And then there was me. Cherise. I wasn't the black sheep of the family. To be a black sheep, you have to be noticed. You have to be a source of frustration, or rebellion, or disappointment. I wasn't any of those things. I was just furniture. I was the hallway lamp they walked past every day, essential enough to be assumed, but never remarkable enough to be acknowledged. The dynamic was set early on. Harrison was 3 years older, a naturally gifted athlete, and fiercely charismatic. He was the golden child. When Harrison sneezed, my parents bought out the pharmacy. When I broke my wrist falling off my bike at age 10, I sat in the living room holding ice to it for 4 hours until my mother finished coordinating the floral arrangements for Harrison's middle school graduation banquet. When she finally noticed the swelling, she sighed, visibly annoyed at the inconvenience of taking me to urgent care. "You really need to be more careful, Cherise," she had said in the car, tapping her manicured nails on the steering wheel. "Your father has a huge presentation tomorrow, and we don't need the stress." Growing up, I learned that my primary duty was to be invisible. I started doing my own laundry at 11. I learned to cook basic meals by 12. I forged my parents' signatures on permission slips because leaving them on the kitchen island meant they would inevitably be swept into the trash alongside my father's junk mail. The emotional starvation wasn't born of malice. It was born of a profound, chilling apathy. They simply did not have the emotional bandwidth for a second child. All their hopes, investments, and affections were poured into Harrison's Ivy League trajectory. The defining moment of my adolescence wasn't a fight or a dramatic screaming match. It was my high school graduation. I had graduated in the top 10% of my class. I didn't expect a parade, but I assumed we would go out to dinner. As I walked off the stage, holding my diploma, I scanned the bleachers. I couldn't find them. I took the bus home. When I walked through the front door, the house was silent. 2 hours later, Rayford and Susan walked in, laughing. They had driven down to Philadelphia because Harrison, then a junior at UPenn, had received an award from his fraternity. They had completely forgotten what day it was. "Oh, sweetie," my mother said, pausing in the foyer as she took off her coat, noticing my graduation gown draped over the banister. "Was that today? I thought it was next Thursday." "Well, congratulations. Did they call your name?" She didn't wait for an answer before walking into the kitchen to pour a glass of Chardonnay. My father didn't even look up from his phone. I went to a local state college, commuting from home to save money. My parents refused to pay for a dorm, citing the astronomical costs of Harrison's out-of-state tuition and his new apartment. I took a job as an administrative assistant at a dental clinic, working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load to pay my own tuition. I lived in my childhood bedroom, but I was practically a ghost. Weeks would pass where the only interaction I had with my father was a grunt as we passed in the hallway. The breaking point, the moment the seed of my departure was planted, happened on my 22nd birthday. I had bought myself a small, single-slice chocolate cake from a nice bakery downtown. I put it in a small cardboard box in the refrigerator, intending to eat it after I finished studying for a mid-term. When I came downstairs at midnight, the box was gone. I found the cake in the garbage can, smashed beneath a pile of coffee grounds and eggshells. What happened to the box in the fridge? I asked my father the next morning. He was sitting at the island, reviewing a contract. "What box?" he asked. not looking up. The white bakery box. Oh, I threw it out. Harrison is coming home for the weekend, and your mother made 3 trays of lasagna. We needed the shelf space. It was just some old pastry, right? It was my birthday cake, I said quietly. Rayford finally looked up, his brow furrowed in mild irritation rather than guilt. Well, Charisse, you shouldn't leave junk food taking up space. You can buy another one. He went back to his contract. He didn't say happy birthday. I stood there, staring at the man who had contributed half my DNA and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, crystalline clarity. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a roommate who didn't pay rent, occupying square footage they'd rather use for something else. Right then and there, I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I would vacate the premises. I didn't pack my bags in a fit of rage. I didn't leave a dramatic letter on the kitchen island detailing their failures as parents. I knew that if I made a scene, they would somehow spin it to make me the villain, the hysterical, ungrateful daughter, disrupting their peaceful lives. Instead, I planned an exit as silent as my existence. My best friend, Bree, had just landed a job as a graphic designer in Burlington, Vermont, a solid 4-hour drive away. She was looking for a roommate to split the rent on a small 2-bedroom apartment. When I told her my plan over coffee, she actually started crying. Bree was the only person who truly understood the hollow reality of the Castillo household. She had spent enough afternoons sitting in my bedroom, listening to the heavy silence of the house, to know I was drowning. "Are you sure, Chloe?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "You're just going to leave without saying a word? If a tree falls in a forest, and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound?" I replied. "If I pack my bags and walk out the door, I guarantee you they won't even notice the tree is gone." The move took exactly 3 weeks. I treated it like a covert military operation. I worked at the dental clinic, went to my final college classes, and packed my life into cardboard boxes while my parents slept. I couldn't just haul a dozen boxes out the front door on a Saturday. That would attract questions. So I smuggled my belongings out in increments. Every Tuesday afternoon, my mother went to her country club for bridge, and my father was at the firm. During that 3-hour window, I would load 3 or 4 boxes into the trunk of my Honda Civic and drive them over to a cheap self-storage locker I had rented a mile away. First went my books and winter clothes, then my childhood keepsakes, what few I had. I was meticulous about maintaining the illusion of occupancy. I left my bed made. I left a few old, frayed sweaters hanging in the closet, carefully spaced out so the rack didn't look entirely empty. I left an empty bottle of cheap perfume and a half-used stick of deodorant on my dresser. By the 3rd week, my room was entirely stripped of anything that actually mattered to me. It was a movie set, a facade. The final day was a Thursday in late May. I had officially graduated college 2 days prior, another event they forgot. Though this time, I didn't even bother telling them the date. I had transferred the last of my savings to my new bank account. My car was packed with the contents of the storage unit. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom at 6 a.m. My parents were still asleep down the hall. The house was quiet, filled with the hum of the central air conditioning. I looked at the neatly made bed, the bare desk, the silent walls. I felt a sudden, terrifying wave of vertigo. I was stepping off a cliff into the unknown, but the air behind me was toxic. I walked down the stairs, making sure to skip the 4th step that always creaked. I placed my house key on the hallway console table, right next to a stack of my father's golf magazines. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cool morning air, and locked the door behind me. I got into my Honda, turned the key, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The first month in Vermont was a surreal experience in decompression. Bree and I set up our little apartment, hanging string lights and buying mismatched furniture from thrift stores. I found a job working as a project coordinator for a local tech startup. I was making decent money, paying my own bills, and breathing air that didn't feel heavy with disappointment. But a dark, pathetic part of me was waiting for the explosion. I kept my phone off silent. I jumped every time it vibrated. I imagined the frantic voicemails, the demands to know where I was, the potential police wellness checks. Despite everything, a tiny, bruised piece of my inner child hoped they would panic, hoped that my absence would finally make them realize my value. 1 week passed. Nothing. 2 weeks. Silence. A month went by. My heart began to harden into a cold, heavy stone. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. Finally, on day 42, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This was it. The moment they realized their daughter was gone. I swiped open the message. Susan. Cherise, did you take the good fabric scissors from the laundry room? I can't find them, and I need to hem Harrison's trousers for his new job. I stared at the glowing pixels until my vision blurred. I was 4 hours away. I hadn't slept in my bed in 6 weeks. My car was missing from the driveway. My key was sitting in plain sight on the console table, and all she cared about were the fabric scissors. They hadn't even opened my bedroom door. They hadn't noticed I wasn't coming down for dinner, or leaving for work, or breathing the same air as them. I typed a single word in response. Me. No, Susan. Well, keep an eye out for them. I dropped the phone onto the sofa and let out a laugh that quickly turned into a sob. Bree came out of the kitchen, saw my face, and wrapped her arms around me as I finally broke down. I didn't cry because I missed them. I cried because I was mourning the parents I was never going to have. I mourned the absolute erasure of my existence in that house. After that day, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I changed my number a few months later when I joined a new family plan with Bree. I didn't send them the new digits. I didn't update my address on anything that would lead back to them. I officially became a ghost. Years went by. 3 years, to be exact. In that time, I built a life that was entirely my own. I was promoted to operations manager at my company. I learned how to snowboard. I fell in love with a man named Liam, a high school history teacher with warm eyes and a family so loud, chaotic, and fiercely loving that it overwhelmed me at first. Liam knew my history. He held my hand when the holidays rolled around and the quiet ache of being an orphan with living parents crept in. I was happy. I was healing. The Castillos were a closed chapter in a book I no longer read. Until a Tuesday afternoon in September, I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a vendor contract, when my office extension rang. Not my cell phone, my office line. A number only clients and vendors used. Cherise Castillo speaking, I answered automatically, my eyes still scanning the spreadsheet on my monitor. It took me 4 hours to track down where you worked. A sharp, impatient voice barked through the receiver. What is wrong with your cell phone? It says the number is disconnected. My blood ran ice cold. The spreadsheet blurred. I would have recognized that voice anywhere. The demanding cadence, the utter lack of a greeting, the immediate pivot to how he was inconvenienced. It was my father. I froze. The receiver pressed against my ear, the familiar chill of my father's voice paralyzing my vocal cords. It had been over 3 years. 3 years of absolute, undisturbed silence. And his first words to me weren't, "Where are you?" or "Are you safe?" or "We missed you." His first words were a complaint about my phone number. "Hello?" He barked into the receiver, the line crackling slightly. "Are you there? Don't play games, I know it's you. The receptionist just transferred me." I swallowed the lump of panic rising in my throat. "I'm here," I said, my voice shockingly steady. "How did you find where I work?" "I had to hire a private investigator," he said, sounding profoundly irritated by the expense. "Do you have any idea how much Robert cost me?" $3,000, just to track down a 25-year-old who decided to throw a temper tantrum and run off to Vermont. It's incredibly selfish, running away like that without leaving a forwarding address. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I had lived in their house for nearly a month while packing my things, and they hadn't noticed. I had left my key on the table, And I was the selfish one. You didn't notice I was gone for 42 days, I replied, the ice in my veins spreading. Why did you hire an investigator now? What do you want? There was a pause. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me he was trying to rein in his temper to get what he needed. My father only ever modulated his tone when he was closing a deal. I need you to come back to New York by Friday, he said, his voice dropping into that faux patient register he used with uncooperative contractors. There are some documents that require your signature. It's a simple administrative matter, but it needs to be done in person in front of a notary. Documents? I asked, pulling the phone slightly away from my ear, feeling a deep, instinctual warning bell ring in my head. What documents? I don't own anything. I don't have any ties to you. Don't be dramatic, he snapped, the patience evaporating instantly. It's just some old LLC paperwork. Evergreen Properties. I set it up years ago for tax purposes. We're restructuring the firm's assets because your brother is stepping up as a junior partner. And we need to dissolve that specific holding company. Your name is listed as the primary officer. It's just a formality. I stared at the blank white wall of my cubicle. Evergreen Properties. I had never heard of it. I had never signed anything related to a real estate holding company. I never signed any documents making me an officer of a company, I said, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. You were 19. You signed a stack of papers I put in front of you before you went to college. Don't pretend you don't remember, he lied smoothly. Look, I don't have time to argue about your memory. I'm overnighting a plane ticket to your office. You fly down Thursday night. We go to the lawyer's office Friday morning, and you can be back in your little snow globe town by Saturday. I'll even pay you $1,000 for your time. $1,000. The price of my compliance. No, I said. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a rage I hadn't heard since my brother scratched my father's luxury sedan in high school. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not flying down. I'm not signing anything. If you forged my name when I was 19, that's your problem to fix. Do not contact this number again. I slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic phone base cracked. I sat there, shaking violently, my vision tunneling. He hadn't called because he realized he loved me. He hadn't called to apologize. He called because I was a rogue asset in his financial portfolio that he needed to liquidate. I left work early that day. When I got to the apartment I now shared with Liam, I collapsed onto the couch and finally told him everything. Liam, bless his heart, didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me that family is still family. He listened, his jaw tightening, his warm brown eyes darkening with anger. He hired an investigator because he's desperate, Liam said, bringing me a cup of tea. Your dad is a commercial developer. If he's suddenly restructuring and desperate to dissolve a shell company in your name, it's not a formality. He's hiding something, and he needs you to take the fall. What do I do? I whispered, feeling the old, familiar urge to make myself small, to disappear into the wallpaper. We fight, Liam said firmly. Tomorrow, we're calling my friend Thomas. He's a corporate defense attorney. Thomas was a shark in a tailored suit. And sitting in his plush downtown office the next afternoon was the most intimidating experience of my life. I gave him the name of the company Evergreen Properties and my father's details. It took Thomas exactly 48 hours to unearth the truth. When he called Liam and me back into his office, he didn't offer us coffee. He just slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. Your instincts were correct, Thomas said, leaning back in his leather chair. It's not a simple restructuring. Your father is currently under investigation by the IRS and the State Attorney General for massive tax fraud and embezzlement. The air left my lungs. What? Thomas opened the folder, revealing photocopies of legal documents, deeds, and bank statements. Evergreen Properties isn't just a shell company. It's the holding company where your father has been funneling unreported income from his commercial builds for the last 7 years. Millions of dollars. And you, my dear, are listed as the sole proprietor and CEO. But I never signed anything, I protested, tears of pure panic springing to my eyes. I swear to God, I never— I believe you, Thomas said gently, pointing to a signature line on a document dated 5 years ago. The signature is a decent forgery, but an expert could spot the hesitation. He used your identity to create a legal firewall between himself and his dirty money. If the IRS drops the hammer, Evergreen Properties takes the hit. Meaning, on paper, you take the hit. Liam grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. So, why does he want her to sign papers now? Why dissolve it? Thomas smiled. But it was a grim, humorless expression. Because the walls are closing in. He knows the audit is coming. If he can get her to sign the dissolution papers now, it effectively acts as her acknowledging ownership and executing the liquidation. It seals the trap. It proves she was the one pulling the strings, not him. He's trying to pass the hot potato before the music stops. I felt physically sick. My own father was trying to frame me for federal tax fraud to save his own skin. The apathy of my childhood felt almost innocent compared to this calculated, predatory malice. What about my brother? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He said my brother was becoming a junior partner. Thomas flipped a page. That's the most interesting part. Your brother isn't stepping up. He stepped out. 2 weeks ago, your brother liquidated all his clean assets, emptied his domestic accounts, and boarded a one-way flight to Dubai. He secured a highly lucrative consulting job overseas, conveniently out of the reach of standard US subpoenas. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped my lips. The golden child. The Ivy League star they had poured all their love, money, and attention into. The moment the ship started sinking, he took the last lifeboat and left them to drown. So my brother abandoned them, I realized, the twisted poetic justice of it settling over me. And now that my father is cornered, he remembered the daughter he forgot. Exactly, Thomas said. He needs a scapegoat. If you had gone down there and signed those papers, you would be looking at federal prison time. What do we do? Liam asked, his voice tight with protective fury. We go on the offensive, Thomas replied, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the fight. We do not wait for the IRS to knock on your door. We go to them first. We file a police report for identity theft and forgery. We hand over everything we just found to the state attorney general, proving you were a victim of a fraudulent corporate setup. It meant destroying them. It meant ensuring my father would go to prison, and my mother, who was undoubtedly complicit in living off the stolen funds, would lose everything. The country club, the galas, the perfect suburban facade, all of it would be reduced to ash. For a brief, fleeting second, the conditioned, invisible child inside me hesitated. I was about to blow up my family, but then I remembered the smashed birthday cake in the garbage. I remembered the graduation they forgot. I remembered the 42 days of silence, broken only by a text about fabric scissors. They weren't my family. They were just my landlords, and they had tried to set the house on fire with me locked inside. Do it, I told Thomas, my voice devoid of any hesitation. Burn it down. We spent the next week compiling the evidence. I sat in a sterile police interrogation room and filed formal charges against my father for identity theft. Thomas contacted the federal investigators, offering my full cooperation as a victim. I thought the worst was over. I thought the legal machine would take over, and I could retreat back to my quiet life in Vermont. I was wrong, because 2 days after the IRS raided my father's upstate New York office, seizing his hard drives and freezing his accounts, he didn't call me. He showed up. It was a Tuesday evening. Liam was working late grading papers. I was walking up the steps to our apartment building, holding a bag of groceries, when a dark SUV idled by the curb. The heavy car door slammed shut, echoing in the quiet twilight street. I turned around. Standing on the sidewalk, looking 10 years older and vibrating with a terrifying, unhinged rage, was my father. And he wasn't alone. Standing right beside him, clutching a designer handbag like a shield, was my mother. They had finally come to visit. The streetlights of our quiet Vermont neighborhood flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the damp pavement. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine and impending rain. I was walking the final block to my apartment, a heavy brown paper bag of groceries in my arms. Inside were apples, a fresh loaf of sourdough, and coffee beans, simple, mundane items that represented a life I had built with my own two hands. I was at peace. That peace shattered the moment a sleek, black luxury SUV turned the corner entirely too fast and idled aggressively against the curb in front of my building. The heavy, reinforced car door slammed open, the sound echoing like a gunshot down the tranquil street. I froze. My grip tightened instinctively on the grocery bag until the plastic handles bit deep into my palms. "You vindictive, ungrateful little wretch," Vincent hissed, his voice trembling not with the sorrow of a father who had missed his daughter, but with absolute, unadulterated fury. He marched toward me, and for a split second, the terrified, invisible 19-year-old girl inside me wanted to turn and run. But as he stepped under the halo of the street lamp, I saw him clearly. He looked 10 years older than the man I remembered. His custom-tailored Italian suit was hopelessly rumpled, his silk tie was loosened and hanging askew, and the arrogant, untouchable sheen he had worn my entire life was entirely gone. It had been replaced by the manic, greasy sweat of a cornered animal. Susan trailed closely behind him, clutching her oversized designer handbag against her chest like a useless shield against the reality of a middle-class sidewalk. "How could you do this to us?" she wailed, her voice shrill and grating as it pierced the quiet evening. "The authorities were at the house this morning. Federal agents, Penelope." They tore through my study. They took his computers. They froze all of our checking accounts. I had to borrow cash from a neighbor just to put gas in the car to drive up here. I stared at her, genuinely astounded. Her waterproof mascara was smudged beneath her eyes, and her perfect blowout was frizzy from the humidity. Her entire world was collapsing. Her husband was facing federal charges, and her primary grievance was the social humiliation of asking a neighbor for gas money. "You called the authorities!" Vincent bellowed, closing the distance until he was only a few feet away. I could smell the stale coffee and sheer panic radiating off him. "You filed a police report. I am your father. And you are trying to send me to federal prison over a technicality." "A technicality?" I echoed. The word tasted vile on my tongue, but my voice was surprisingly steady. The adrenaline flooding my veins wasn't telling me to flee anymore. It was telling me to stand my ground. "You forged my signature to frame me for your tax fraud. You set up a shell company in my name to take the fall for millions of dollars in embezzled money. If I hadn't gone to the police, I would be the one going to federal prison." "You wouldn't have gone to prison," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "You're a young woman with no criminal record. They would have given you probation, a slap on the wrist. I would have paid your legal fees. For God's sake. But me? The judge will crucify me to make an example. You have to call that shark lawyer of yours right now. You have to retract the statement. Tell them you signed the documents and simply forgot. Tell them it was a misunderstanding between a father and daughter." I stood utterly still, absorbing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his demand. After 3 years of absolute silence, after 22 years of treating me like a piece of furniture in his hallway, his grand master plan was to drive 4 hours north and order me to confess to a massive federal crime in order to save his country club lifestyle. He truly believed I was nothing more than an extension of his own needs, a tool to be discarded or utilized at his convenience. "No," I said. It was a single, quiet syllable, but it hung in the air with the weight of an anvil. Vincent's face contorted into something incredibly ugly and violent. The mask of the sophisticated businessman dissolved entirely, leaving behind a desperate, cornered tyrant. He lunged forward, raising his hand, his eyes wide with rage. I didn't even have time to flinch before the heavy oak door of my apartment building violently swung open. Gavin flew down the concrete steps, taking them 2 at a time, and inserted himself smoothly and immovably between me and my father. Gavin was a high school history teacher with a gentle soul, but he was also 6'2", broad-shouldered, and fiercely protective. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his fists. He simply planted his feet on the pavement, squared his shoulders, and stared Vincent down, his chest rising and falling with a quiet, terrifying menace. Vincent stumbled backward, his raised hand faltering. He wasn't used to physical intimidation. He fought his battles in boardrooms with contracts and lawyers. Faced with someone who wasn't conditioned to fear him, his bravado evaporated. "You need to step back," Gavin said, his voice dangerously low and calm. "Right now," Susan sobbed, stepping forward to tug frantically on Vincent's sleeve. "You're making a mistake, Penelope," she pleaded, her eyes darting nervously toward Gavin. "Please, sweetie, think of the family. Think of your brother." Preston just secured that massive partnership. His new firm won't tolerate a public scandal like this. The press will have a field day. "You're ruining your brother's career too." A cold, humorless laugh tore its way out of my throat. The sound startled even me. I looked at my mother, marveling at the bottomless depths of her delusion. Even now, standing on the precipice of total ruin, her primary concern was protecting the golden child. "You really don't know, do you?" I asked, shaking my head slowly. "Know what?" Vincent snapped, trying and failing to peer intimidatingly around Gavin's broad shoulder. "About your golden boy," I said, leaning out so they could see the absolute, unapologetic lack of pity in my eyes. "My lawyer, Thomas, looked into all of the corporate accounts as part of the defense strategy. When the initial audit flags started waving 2 weeks ago, your son didn't just step down from the firm. He liquidated every clean asset he had. He emptied your joint family trust, transferred the funds to offshore accounts, and boarded a one-way flight to Dubai. He's gone." The silence that fell over the street was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Susan's jaw dropped, a pathetic, high-pitched gasp escaping her lips. "No. No. That's impossible. He's in Chicago for a real estate conference. He texted me from the airport. Call him," I challenged, my voice ringing clear in the cold air. "Try his number right now. See if it goes through." Vincent's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. He looked exactly like a man who had just been shot but hadn't quite registered the pain yet. His hands shook violently as he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He fumbled with the screen, dialed the number he knew by heart, and pressed the phone to his ear. We all stood there in the chilling evening air, locked in a macabre tableau. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. And then, loud enough for all of us to hear in the dead quiet of the street, the faint, robotic voice leaked from his earpiece. "We're sorry. The number you have reached is no longer in service." Vincent stared blankly into the middle distance. His fingers went slack. The expensive phone slipped from his grasp, tumbling through the air before hitting the concrete sidewalk with a sharp, catastrophic crack. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of broken glass. The sound of approaching sirens broke the stillness. I hadn't noticed Gavin slipping his own phone back into his pocket. He had silently dialed 911 the moment he heard the yelling through our open living room window. 2 local police cruisers rounded the corner, their sirens wailing, their lights painting the brick facades of the apartment buildings in alternating flashes of harsh red and blue. Vincent had crossed state lines while actively under federal investigation for a major financial crime. The local authorities had been alerted the moment his SUV pinged a toll booth on the interstate, and the disturbance call had given them the exact location. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles and approached, firmly instructing Vincent to place his hands on the hood of the SUV, he didn't even attempt to fight back. The fight had been completely and utterly drained out of him. The realization that his beloved son had methodically fleeced him, combined with the inescapable, cold reality of the steel handcuffs clicking securely around his wrists, broke the man completely. He slumped over the hood of the car, a hollow shell. Susan sank onto the curb, weeping hysterically into her hands. She wasn't weeping for me. I doubted she was even weeping for her husband. She was mourning the illusion of her perfect life, which had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces on a Vermont sidewalk. 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded with brutal efficiency. Vincent pled guilty to multiple counts of federal fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft. The paper trail Thomas had provided to the investigators was insurmountable. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The government ruthlessly seized all of their remaining domestic assets to pay back the stolen funds and the massive fines. The sprawling suburban house with the manicured lawn, the luxury cars, the elite country club memberships, it all vanished like smoke. Susan was forced to move into a tiny, rent-controlled apartment 2 towns over, entirely dependent on whatever meager wages she could earn working as a part-time receptionist at a local dry cleaner. As for the golden boy in Dubai, he never called them. He never sent a single dime to help with the legal fees. He simply disappeared into the desert, leaving them completely alone to drown in the mess they had created. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't send a letter to the prison. I let the ghosts of my past fade away. A year later, I married Gavin in a small, breathtakingly beautiful ceremony in the Green Mountains, surrounded by his loud, chaotic, and fiercely loving family, and my best friend, Bree. As I stood at the altar, looking out at the rows of wooden chairs, I realized something profound. There were no empty seats reserved out of a toxic sense of obligation. Every person in that room saw me, truly saw me, and loved me for exactly who I was. My life was finally, entirely my own. I wasn't an afterthought anymore. I was visible, I was cherished, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free.